So today's episode is about imperialism, alignment, and the politics of dependence that is very common within the modern Middle East today. So imperialism is often thought of as a thing of the past, something or a chapter that closed with the end of colonization. But for much of the world, imperialism did not disappear. It adapted. It reorganized itself through military alliances, security agreements, economic dependencies, and political alignments that continue to shape sovereignty right up until the present moment. If we want to understand the current crisis unfolding in the Middle East today, from the ongoing dispossession and annexation in Palestine or in Palestine to the escalating tensions involving Iran and the widening regional instability, despite their extraordinary economic resources, right? All the oil and all of the revenue and all of the resources that they have been able to accumulate as a result of the oil. Their security is deeply tied to external guarantees directly associated with imperialism and imperial powers. And we need to be mindful of that. I'm talking about people who are, cognizant of, because all of this affects us. Like, we're not, just because I don't live in the GCC, just because I don't live in the Middle East, we are all impacted by the things that are happening. It's I am located in the center of empire as part of the Black American experience and the belly of the beast, right? Very up close and personal within the empire. So just because I'm not situated somewhere else, I am, and we all are very much implicated by these imperial politics. So what makes this moment particularly striking or interesting is not only the persistence of external influences, but the ways in which histories have become fragmented. So what do I mean by that? So if we look at the beginnings of Islam, for example, because we're talking about the Middle East, right? And so the modern Middle East is built on the founding or the foundations of Islam and the evolution of Islam from then till right now. And so if we look at the early history of Islam, it includes a profound example of refuge and mutual protection. And that refuge and that protection it wasn't found in the imperial alliances that we see today. No, it was found of all places in Africa. What do you mean? If we look at the sanctuary that Abyssinia offered to the earliest Muslim converts. Abyssinia is today modern Ethiopia. When the message of Islam started to spread, and the messenger of Islam sent those people, those early converts, to Abyssinia. He sent them to the king in Abyssinia, modern day Ethiopia. And the reason why he sent them there was because he said that the king there is strong and the king is also just. And he's a Christian king. And if you go there, tell him that I sent you. This is the messenger of Islam. This is what he's saying to the earliest converts, because the government at that time wanted to kill these early converts. And he sends them to Abyssinia, or modern day Ethiopia, for refuge. And then sure enough, the government found out that where they were, they went to Abyssinia, or modern day Ethiopia, and they confronted the king. And the king protected them and he shielded them. Now, this is important. This is an important piece of history for the region. Earliest converts, the earliest people who accepted Islam, had to find refuge with a Black African king who was strong enough to repel the powers looking for their people. He said, nope, can't have them, go about your business. That's important. Another example, if you look at the United Arab Emirates, for example, this place, when it was still a barren desert and it wasn't built up to the extent that it is today. Today we see it in all of its glory, Dubai, and all of its glory. But back in the 60s, in the 70s, much of the labor used to build this place, much of the intellectual labor at that, were people from the continent, specifically Sudan. You can't decouple the role that the Sudanese played in building up the United Arab Emirates. And I know this because I've lived in the region. I have friends who are from the region. I have Sudanese friends who were born there, who were born and raised, whose family migrated from Sudan to the UAE in the 1960s and in the 1970s. Born and raised in the UAE, and can speak to exactly what I'm saying. And the people in the United Arab Emirates, they don't deny this. This is not breaking news.
إن السودان الذي وقف إلى جانب الشعب الأماراتي منذ تأسيس دولته لن ينسى أن تلك الدولة كانت في طليعة من تنكروا لهذا الإحسان.
Those were the comments of Al-Haris Idris, Sudan's ambassador to the UN. But why would Sudan feel so betrayed by the United Arab Emirates? When the state was created, Sudan was among the first to recognize it. In 1972, the first overseas presidential visit of Sheikh Zayed, the UAE's founding father, was to Sudan. By this stage, Sudanese professionals were already making major contributions to the UAE's rapid development. At one stage, all 7 directors of the UAE's municipalities were Sudanese. A notable one was Kamal Hamza, Dubai's municipal director from 1961 to 1985.
ستظل الإمارات في ذاكرة شعبنا رمزا للخيانة السياسية والانحراف الأخلاقي ومصفة عار لا تمحوها كل مساحيق التجميل ولا حملات العلاقات العامة.
Now we have these two critical points in history. Remember, because I'm talking about the role of empire today that is shaping the Gulf and the region. And I'm talking about the role of history that brought this region to its place in time today. And these two realities are converging like right before our eyes. Now, when you look at the relationship today between the Gulf countries and their relationship with empire and their relationship with Africa. If you look at it today on the surface, you would not think that the history that I just presented to you was true. You would not think that. Because of the treatment of Africans by these people in the Gulf countries, because of their treatment and because of their alignment with the imperialists, there's something wrong. There's something happening that we need to be mindful of. So what I'm saying is that, the modern geopolitics obscures these interdependencies that I just named. And they're replaced with these strategic calculations that are shaped by these global hierarchies. So these global hierarchies are situating the Gulf countries in a place just based off of their wealth and their resources. And unfortunately, these Gulf countries are buying into these global hierarchies, and they're forgetting their past. They're forgetting how they got there. They're forgetting the relationship to the people who believed in them and helped them to get there, to side with empire. So the question before us is not simply about war or alliances or diplomacy. It's about sovereignty in a world structured by unequal power. It is about whether wealth can substitute for autonomy. So are these countries autonomous simply because they have wealth? And we need to ask ourselves, do we see these people in this region, do we see them working towards that? Or do we see them allying with an old order that's on the decline? It seems so reasonable, to me at least. It seems reasonable to think that you would want to invest in the future, which is without question. The future is in Africa. Not only that, but these are the people that have historically helped you get to the position that you're in today. The people who these Gulf countries are aligned with and who they have pledged their allegiance to have no such history. If we want to understand where we are right now, we need to look at a few things, and we need to look at a few things from some different angles. Because remember, this is about imperialism, and imperialism didn't end. Its methods changed, and the consequences of that transformation are unfolding in real time, right before us, right before our eyes. And if we don't wake up to history, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not here to predict the future, but I know for certain that if you understood the history of imperialism and the history of the people who are the imperial powers today, if you understood their history and their track record, there's no way that you could be surprised, for example, when, you have the kinds of disloyalty happening right in front of the whole world, where the whole world can predict certain outcomes, and you, for some reason, can't see that their loyalty is just based on what you can do for them, how much money you're willing to pay them. You can't see that. What kind of veil is over your eyes? What kind of lock is in your chest that's not allowing you to sense and be sensible about these things?
الهجمات والاعتداءات الإيرانية غير مبررة، والحل العسكري لن يؤدي إلا إلى المزيد من الأزمات، بينما يظل السبيل العقلاني لعدم توسع الصراع العسكري هو الحوار الجاد والمسؤول. وهذه الهجمات تؤدي إلى تداعيات خطيرة على العلاقات الثنائية، والتي سيكون لها تأثير مباشر على كافة المستويات السياسية والاقتصادية والتجارية.
Far away in Washington, Donald Trump called the war he helped start stupid, but justified.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
How did we get here? We have to let's talk about Palestine, right? Let's talk about Palestine and the colonial framework. So when we talk about settler colonialism, we're thinking about the ways in which the Europeans, or Christopher Columbus, for example, settled in the Americas. Basically, the Europeans come to the Americas, they settle, or similar to the Europeans who come to South Africa and they settle, or the Europeans who go to a place like New Zealand, Australia, and they settle. Settler colonialists, they settle down, they settle there, they carve out spaces, they disrupt, life, they disrupt histories, they disrupt cultures, they disrupt language, they disrupt education, knowledge, ways of being, ways of knowing. They disrupt literally everything with their settling, and they replace it with something of their own and make their own thing the thing that governs the place in which they settle. So the native people, the people who are native to these lands now, are having to adapt and adjust to a foreign way of life. This is essentially what settler colonialism is. And it's always violent. It's always violent. It's always about humiliation, right? Genocide, right? It's always about the rape and the pillage and all of these things, right? But the difference is, we only had, I guess, for lack of a better term, only had the luxury of looking at it as an act of the past, as something from the past, and as like a historical monument, and almost not, I won't say theoretical, because we have the people here who were impacted by it. We have the indigenous people across the lands that I just named, across the lands that were settled. We still have their descendants here, and we can see the impact that settler colonialism had on them. But to actually see it play out over time with modern technology, to live through this point in time where you can actually look at exactly and understand exactly the method that was used in the past. Now we're seeing it. It's not simply a territorial dispute. It is a settler colonial dynamic. And understanding this framework helps us explain not only how this crisis has existed for decades, but also how some of the, or really all of the most powerful players, especially the Europeans and the Americans, allowed it because it is part of their history. It is part of how they became who they are. That's very important for us to be mindful of. So now when we take that and now we look at the escalation with Iran, right? And the regional power versus the global order. So Iran, for whatever it's worth, always been a regional power that's been a challenge in challenging Western dominance. Say what you want to say about them. They are one of a few who have that distinction as a group of people, as a nation state who has decided decisively that we are going to challenge Western dominance, even if it means that we give up everything. We lose everything in the process, right? And so they've used proxy conflicts and they've used all sorts of scenarios to live and govern on their own terms. And so, we're just at a point as Israel wants to expand and expand its greater Israel agenda, which means taking parts of Saudi Arabia, taking Lebanon, taking parts of Syria, taking parts of Egypt, expanding this settler colonial project beyond the borders of modern day Palestine and what we call Israel today. They want to expand it to include huge swaths of the Middle East. Everyone else, it seems, is they're gonna go along with it. This is what it seems like. Everyone else is gonna go along with it. Iran is not. And so that's where we are. As this greater Israel project comes to bear, there is absolutely no resistance from nowhere in the GCC, nowhere in the region. They all laid down. They saw what happened to Saddam. They saw what happened in Libya. They laying down. They're just laying down. Iran is the only one standing. The Gulf states, their dependence is completely, or their security is completely hinged or hitched to the United States of America and whoever is pulling the strings of the United States. They don't represent any kind of challenge or any kind of interference in the ways in which Iran did, the ways in which Iraq did, the ways in which Libya did to whatever extent, right? Like they don't even try. There's not even, they don't even, their security is guaranteed by the United States. So if the United States decides to lift that security, guess what happens? The house of cards falls. It's really that simple. But despite all of this wealth and despite these so-called guarantees, we have to understand. We have to remember the history of these people. They broke every treaty that they ever signed with the indigenous people. They are the same people. To think that you are somehow special to them is a level of naivete suitable for an elementary aged child. And I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't have a nice way to put that. There's not a nice way to say it. I don't know how else to say it. But if you think that you're different, if you think that they're going to treat you differently, good luck. Because remember, these arrangements are the results of the wealth that the GCC has and the oil under their feet. This is what this alliance is about. Let's not play around with this. Like, this is what it's about. But this wealth does not guarantee respect in global hierarchies. These global hierarchies have always been shaped by race. They've been shaped by history and military power. You don't have any of those in the GC. You don't have any military power. Your history is not respected by these imperial powers, and neither is your race. We don't care. It doesn't matter if you check white on the box for your census data. It doesn't matter if you check white on the box. It doesn't matter. It's not respected. You need to return back to what got you here. Somebody got to say it. Somebody needs to say it. Because we're dealing right now with what I would call historical amnesia. Because we know what is happening in the Sudan is the result of this historical amnesia and these fractured solidarities. Forgetting where you came from, forgetting how you got where you are. And so what we see with the GCC states is the GCC countries, we see them mimicking imperialism. We see how they treat African countries and African people in light of, the mutual benefit throughout history, in light of the sanctuary provided for them in the early stages, in the incubation stages of Islam, in light of much later in modern times, the incubation stages of the development of the United Arab Emirates and the role that the Sudanese and other Africans played in helping to bring them to the present moment. Yet these people, these same countries, are mimicking the imperialists, the colonialists, and how they treat, thinking that they are more like the imperial powers, not realizing that the imperial powers, they don't like you. They don't like you. They don't respect you. But here you are mimicking these people. And remember, this is a house of cards. This relationship is a house of cards. Once they've usurped all of your resources and all of your wealth, or when they just get tired of you, they will pivot. And what are you doing in preparation for that pivot? That's a question. That's not a rhetorical question. That's a question that, and I'm sure people who are in these countries and who are ruling these countries, they're not listening to this podcast. So I'm sure, I'm not really talking to them, but I'm just talking to people who would like to have some understanding of what's happening in the world, because everybody is perplexed. Because I have family, I have friends, I have loved ones who live all throughout the GCC and across the Middle East and North Africa. I have friends who live there, and I have friends who have relatives that are there. And so I'm very much, sensitive to the things that are happening in the region, the people who I love and I care about. So I'm just offering a perspective as someone who is a very personal and a very intimate knowledge of the empire, as someone who is born and raised in the belly of the beast in the United States of America, and who watches them and their moves very closely. So this is just this is where I sit with regards to my perspective and my analysis.
I don't think that the system in Iran will collapse anytime soon. As I said, the Iranian leadership has been preparing for an eventuality like this because of what they have continued to hear from Mr. Netanyahu in the past 40 years. He has been calling for the destruction of Iran, and so the Iranians obviously, took note of that and have been preparing themselves for such an eventuality. And as we see in the news already, they're in the process of electing a new so-called leader to succeed Khamenei. They've already set up an interim leadership of 3 personalities from the leadership. So the system, I think, the only way that the system will go, I think, it will be through the Iranian people.
So I want to close with this. Imperialism today doesn't always come with flags and formal colonies. Nah. That's not what imperialism looks like today. It arrives through agreements, dependencies, alignments that shapes who gets protection, who is expendable, and whose sovereignty is conditionals, and what the conditions are, whose cries are heard and whose are silenced. The current crisis in the Middle East reveal not only external intervention, but also the difficult choices that states make within unequal global systems. If there's anything to be learned from this moment, it is that autonomy cannot be bought. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much oil you have. Autonomy is not for sale. Alliances are always temporary. They are never permanent, not in the global geopolitical sphere. And histories of solidarity cannot be sustained without deliberate commitment. Histories of solidarity, what I mean by that specifically is the history and the relationship between Abyssinia and the modern day Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example. The very first place that Islam entered when it left Mecca, before it went anywhere else, was in the Horn of Africa. That's where it spread. And from the Horn of Africa, it spread throughout the rest of the continent. And the modern solidarity with regards to the relationship between the UAE and the Sudan. And these histories, just because these histories exist, without a deliberate commitment to them, they become thing of the past. They become something that so many of us don't even think about anymore. So many of us have forgotten. But because the commitment to this wasn't deliberate, the commitment shifted from Africa to empire. Imperialism didn't end, it changed its methods. Wealth can buy weapons, but it cannot buy sovereignty. Alliances built on dependence dissolve the moment power decides to shift. That's it for now, y'all. Peace.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut.
Yo, what up, yo? Time is running out, it's for real though. Let's connect politics, you know.